My name's Mike Gainey. I've been a resident here 2 years. I spent 40 years in marketing, mostly consumer packaged goods, food and beverage marketing. And I'm here to talk to you about national security. Perfect segue, right? So there's several stories, afternoon. There are several stories embedded in this story. This is like Russian dolls. We're going to open up the big doll and then keep going deeper and deeper. First thing we're going to talk about is the U.S. Army War College. And I was lucky enough to be invited to go there the first week in June this year. And Judith got to go with me, but she was not allowed to go to classes. She couldn't pass the security clearance. I spent a week with our future military leaders. I'll tell you a bit about the program, the history of the War College itself, and then the other three boxes over here. Number one is the War College. Second thing we're going to talk about is how conflict between China and the U.S. is forecast to unfold by the latest military planner briefings that were just given to the Pentagon in May. And they gave us a declassified version of that, cleaned up a bit, but it's pretty eye-opening. So I'm going to start you off high, take you down in terms of emotions. Number 3 in the upper right-hand corner is we're going to talk briefly about the concept of a limited war. After World War II, the idea of all-out thermonuclear war and wiping out the earth was unthinkable, but we allowed, as a relief valve, small conflicts to flare up and gradually escalate. And that's the concept of limited war. We're going to talk about the implications of that. And then finally, if we have time, we're going to talk about Iran. I happened to be there the week before Israel attacked Iran. And we had a briefing by the general who's in charge of that region of the world. And I'm going to share with you what he told me. So, first of all, the U.S. Army War College. This is really quite an institution. It's the capstone education opportunity for future military officers of all branches. In my class were Army, Air Force, Marine, and Space Force officers. They are in a 10-month graduate level program. They receive master's certification from this, and they are on campus at a location I'll tell you about in a second. The final week of the 10-month program they call the National Security Seminar, and they invite 160 civilians like me to mix it up with the officers. We go to class with them, we have lunch with them, we had a cookout at one of the officers' homes one night, and we all went to briefings by retired 4-star generals, senior security people, and an author. We're going to talk about all of that. So the War College is located in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Has anybody been to the War College or know anything about it? Yeah, there are very few people. In the last session I did, there was only 1 or 2. You know,
I haven't been there, but I went to Bucknell University past Carlisle.
So we got someone that went to Bucknell and has been by it. Okay, that counts. You're the leader in the clubhouse right now. Barbara?
Since you have a background in marketing, what is it that made you an invitee to this? It doesn't seem like your background.
Oh, that's mysterious, Barbara. We're going to get there. I promise. Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Does anybody know this person? Jim Thorpe, yes. He's the most famous graduate of the Carlisle Indian School, which was in Carlisle from 1879 to 1917 or 18 or so. And then the Army, when the school shut down, the Army took over the property, and it is now the Carlisle Barracks. And that is where the War College is located. The War College actually came out of a request by President Roosevelt, to examine the failings of the Spanish-American War. He felt that it needed deeper study. We need to be more organized and disciplined in how we organized our forces. And so he asked his person, Elihu Root, who was both Secretary of War and later Secretary of State, to establish an institution but to educate our military leaders and to address the shortcomings during the Spanish-American War. So this credo that the purpose of a strong military is not to start a war but to deter it has been the credo of the military since 1901. The belief, and if you talk to all the officers, the last thing they want to do is to get into a battle. But they do want the U.S. to have strong enough military forces that nobody will mess with us. And we're going to see where we stand in terms of that deterrence in just a bit. So this is a shot from one of the seminars that I attended. The theater seats about 600, and you can see military uniforms of all types in there, including some that don't seem like they're from the U.S. The civilians were mixed in. There are 350 U.S. officers in the program, and then there are 75 officers from overseas partners or allies or close friends, and I'll show you a few of those in just a second. The people seated at the table were in my class, and these are the people I spent all week with. The young man on the left in the dark suit is the city manager for El Paso, Texas. The guy sitting next to him in the gold tie, Dave, has an AI startup helping homeless veterans avoid homelessness. The woman right there in the gray and white works with NGOs worldwide to try to address famine and nutrition worldwide. The woman in black who's smiling is a Columbia University professor who specializes in conflict resolution. Next to her and between her and me is Rich. He was a real estate developer for 40 years, but he had a real interest in Gettysburg and the Battlefield Preservation Society, so he's done major fundraising for them. And then you got this other guy in the red tie on the right that nobody can figure out how he got in. I mentioned there were officers from around the world. These four were in my class. Gazim from Kosovo, Watanyu from Thailand, Salman from Bahrain, and Mariano from Mexico. And they were really personable, really nice people. They brought their families with them from their countries to central Pennsylvania near Harrisburg for 10 months. And these are their graduation photos, which was the day after we finished our session. Okay, Mike, how did you end up getting invited to the War College? It started here on a cruise from Buenos Aires to Barcelona. We had dinner the first night with this couple. The guy on the right, Bruce, was an instructor at the War College. Over the course of 3 weeks, we got discussing current affairs, conflicts in the world, the military. I told him that I was a volunteer instructor on foreign policy at Ollie at NC State, and that I had a keen interest in this stuff. And he said, would you be interested in going to the War College? I said, yeah, sure. So that was 2 years ago. I didn't make the cut 2 years ago. And this year, I did make the cut. So how do you make the cut? He nominated me. And then The 350, of the 350 officers in the program, 160 of them get to select somebody from the civilian pool that they think deserves to go. And Amanda, who is a colonel, selected me. She selected me because of my volunteer background, because I was doing the foreign policy course, and her final punchline was that she thought somebody that had worked in snack food marketing belonged in central Pennsylvania, the snack food capital of the U.S. And I'm proud of that. Thank you. So let's talk about Amanda. I've told you top line about the caliber of people in this program. She's been in the Washington State National Guard for 18 years. She is a colonel, so that's a pretty senior officer. She's a medical services specialist. Her real specialty is medical supply chain management. And she works with all branches of the military, making sure that the suppliers have enough inventory, they have the transport lined up, and the right equipment gets to the right people at the right time. Amanda, who I met at Carlisle, of course, lives in Biloxi, Mississippi with her husband and 4 children. He is a regular Army medevac helicopter pilot, and she has a full-time job managing clinical trials for a drug company. So if anybody deserves the Superwoman cape, it's Amanda. And all the officers in the class that I spoke with had credentials and backgrounds like this. They are really, really dedicated to what they're doing, and they're the people who are going to do their best to keep our country safe going forward in the face of the challenges that we're going to discuss in just a minute. 2 of the speakers we had were one was a retired 4-star general, General Brooks on the left. He was in charge of the Pacific Command and later the Africa Command. I'll show you what that means. And unexpectedly, the instructor in my class invited this guy, General Michael Kurilla. Kurilla the Gorilla is how he's known throughout the military. He's in charge of the Middle East, and he's the one that came in and gave us the briefing about what was going on the week before Israel attacked Iran. These officers are in charge of all military in these regions of the world. General Brooks had PACCOM, or Pacific Command, and then he had Africa Command, and Kurilla was in charge of Central Command. But that's how the military is organized in terms of theaters or areas of responsibility. We also had a speaker, Mary Surratt, and Mary has studied Putin for 21 years. And she gave a really compelling 1-hour lecture about his background, his KGB mentality, and his relentless pursuit of reassembling the disassembled Soviet Union. And somebody raised a question of, well, what's it going to take to negotiate with this guy? And her response, as Barbara properly knows, is there is no negotiating with him. He is going to do what he wants to do, regardless of the amount of bloodshed in Ukraine and the damage to the Russian economy. He wants to restore the Soviet Union's greatness to Russia. So if we had to think right now about who were the 3 major threats to our country, who do you think would be number 1 from a military perspective? China? Okay. Anybody else? Different idea? Russia. Very good. You Russian scholars actually are correct in the sense that the military views Russia as an acute threat. Why do they do that? Because they have initiated, unsolicited, the first major land war in Europe since World War II. Plus, you got Putin driving the bus, and he's not going to be stopped. So from a military standpoint, they are very, very concerned about Russian expansion and growth in the area of their operations. China, obviously, is number two. Rather than an acute threat, it's described as a pacing threat. So what does a pacing threat mean? Well, it means that China is starting to catch up to us, both in soft and hard power. Their military is strong. They're using their economic clout with the Belt and Road Initiative, where they do major infrastructure projects all over the world to indenture countries to them. And the caliber of the military weaponry is now at a par or even better than some of the things that we have, depending on the weapon systems. So China is a pacing threat, meaning they're close, but they haven't caught up with us yet. The third major threat was Iran. And you say, why Iran? It's so far away. It's over in the Middle East. We don't have any real interests over there. The real military worry is not so much that they're going to directly attack the U.S. or U.S. interests, but through their proxies, they may use their nuclear capability to do dirty suitcase bombs, something on a limited tactical basis. So those are the three bad guys if you look at it through a military lens. In order. Yes, question.
So I'm curious, if you flip that for a second, how would they see us in terms of the threat, and how do you define threat?
So the question is, if you flip this and you look at the U.S. through each of their eyes, how do they view us? I have my own thoughts about that, but nobody did answer that at the War College. Russia feels like it got robbed and it wants its treasure back. That's basically how Russia views us. We're in the way. Russia has always been upset since NATO expanded from about 18 countries to 33 countries. There was always a buffer between Russia and the West, and that's pretty much gone now. That may be a strategic mistake that was made by the Western nations by bringing in Hungary, Romania, the old Eastern European countries into NATO. That may have been a mistake. History will tell over the long haul. The Chinese, we're going to talk a little bit more about China. They view the U.S. and our allies as more of a geopolitical threat because Japan, the Philippines, and Taiwan are very close geographically to China. Taiwan's only 100 miles off the coast. So if it was flipped around and China was in Cuba, that's kind of the way they view Taiwan. We certainly wouldn't want them there. They certainly don't want a democratic government in Taiwan because it kind of gets in the way. And Iran has, their doctrine is death to the U.S. and Israel. That's their stated goal. And they have not wavered off of that. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But that's my take on it based on what I heard. And if anybody has another question or comment, that was a really good question. One of the things, when you're talking foreign policy, it's always helpful to go to the other side of the table and look back. Because we always think we're right, and we're not always right. So that's the War College. Those are the top-level things that we talked about. The next topic is going to be how China and the U.S. get tangled up in a conflict. And it's really about how China takes Taiwan. Why does Why does China want Taiwan? Anybody have any thoughts about that?
What's your Cuba example?
Cuba example is a very good one, yes. Too close. Too close for comfort, yes.
By not taking it, they appear weak.
By not taking it, they appear weak. That's absolutely right. Barbara?
Taiwan was historically part of China.
Ah, that's probably the most important from a mindset. Taiwan was historically part of China. It goes back to Chiang Kai-shek. After World War II, his troops retreated when they got pushed off the mainland. They retreated to Taiwan, and that's the only reason that Taiwan is a democratic republic right now. But China has they have a sovereign view of Taiwan. They said it was part of our country, much like Putin using the Soviet Union analogy. Taiwan has always been part of our country. It's China. We want it back. We want to control it. What's the question? Pete?
Taiwan is full of treasures from China and some very successful businesses.
Yeah, Taiwan is full of treasures from China and very successful businesses. We'll talk about one of those when we get a little further into the conflict, because that plays heavily. I like to compare countries geographically and population-wise, just frame of reference. So the dark blob is China. Geographically, it's about the same land mass as the United States, with 3 times the population. The challenge that China faces really, it started about 3 years ago, is they have reached peak population, and their population is starting to decline. Why is that? The one baby policy for years really came back to bite them. The second thing is there's a historical pattern that as undeveloped and underdeveloped countries advance, the more prosperous they are, the smaller the family size. The U.S. is a good example of that. We are well below the replacement birth rate in our country right now. The major advantage we have is something called immigration. If it was not for immigration, we'd be on the decline too. The disadvantage for China is, who wants to move to China? So I wouldn't want to be the marketing guy for the Chinese Tourism and Immigration Bureau. I think that'd be a tough sell. So over the long haul, over the next 20 to 30 years, China is expected to be on the decline. They will lose workers, the economy will weaken, and there's no telling what will happen as the country starts to decline. And we would be in the same situation again if it weren't for immigration. So that's China versus the U.S. population and landmass. Taiwan, not even half the size of Florida. The population of, well, it's 2/3 the population of California. So it's not very big geographically. It's big in terms of population density compared to the U.S., certainly, but pretty small potatoes. Here's what we talked about earlier about why Taiwan is so interesting. If you look at it if you come over here and you put on your Chinese glasses, you go, holy crap, there's a U.S. ally down there in the Philippines, and there's another one up there in Japan, and here's Taiwan sitting right there in the middle. Those islands are not very far geographically from China. So this is like a bee buzzing in your ear constantly. It's an annoyance to them. Again, it's only 100 miles from mainland China to Taiwan. From a geographic perspective, it's very mountainous in the east and flatter in the west. And the military planners told us there are only 3 really good landing zones in Taiwan, And one of them happens to be where the TSMC manufacturing plant is. That is the computer chip company that makes 55% of the world's complex computer chips. That's what Pete was alluding to. So how in the world does the U.S. get tangled up in a battle between Taiwan and China? There were a couple provocative things that were said at the War College. This was the one that really snapped my head back. The next time we go to war, war will be coming to us. We have been so insulated since the Revolutionary War. We've had oceans protecting us. You can forget that. The question is, how will war be coming to us? And that's what the planners mapped out for us. So let's kind of walk through what their thinking is. The first thing China would likely do to go after Taiwan would be to launch a major cyber attack in the U.S. and take out the electric grid, water supplies, and communications. They would either do that through cyber attacks, or they could detonate a small yield nuclear weapon in the atmosphere over the U.S. and fry mass quantities of electronics through an electromagnetic pulse. The other thing, the next step would be to blind all of our satellites. Military satellites, spy satellites, communication satellites. Your GPS no longer works. We have no satellites. They're all fried because China has the ability to take them out, either individually, which would be hard, or in mass quantities through exploding something at a very high altitude. The next step would be, in the middle of all this chaos, to launch a disinformation campaign to those Americans who were receiving information from the outside about how there's a vast campaign of intimidation from the U.S. against the Chinese, both in the U.S. and worldwide. So they're going to make us out to be the bad guys. Sounds like some previous leaders, doesn't it? And all this does is yield to chaos at home. Can you imagine 14-year-olds with no access to TikTok? You are not able to get gas for your car because the electric grid is out. Water supplies are down. Truly, chaos would reign. FEMA and the states would be likely really overwhelmed trying to deal with that. So while that is all going on, that's all a prelude to the big setup for military action by China. What the planners forecast is China would directly attack Japanese islands and some smaller Philippine islands. We have treaties with both countries. We would come to their aid and rush troops and material out to try to repel the Chinese invasion. While that's going on, obviously we join up. Sorry, I skipped a slide. So there's us joining up in the fight against the Japanese, or against the Chinese in the Japanese islands and the Philippines. And while we're doing that, we're distracted. You remember on the map, Japan was to the north and Philippines is to the south? That's when they make their move against Taiwan. We're distracted. We've committed lots of resources. We think that's the battlefront, but it's really not. The main front is going to be in Taiwan. So what that means is, yes, good question.
So, if we go back in your presentation here just a little bit,
Yep.
and you're pointing out all the things that could happen to us here, and I was thinking, well, I assume we can do that to them too, with cyber attacks, is knocking out the satellites and all of that. Is that true? It takes the trigger.
Yeah, so the question was, I've been talking about all the things the Chinese could do to us in terms of cyber attacks and knocking out communications. Couldn't we do the same thing too? It depends on how impaired our military communications and ability are because of cyber attacks and because of EMPs or some other kind of disruption. We might be back to chalkboards and paper messages. We don't know the extent, how resilient our systems could be. But right now, we're really vulnerable. Yes, AG, and then I'll come back to you.
I have a question. I've got a friend with Duke Energy that has shared with me that our nuclear plants and our electric grids are already under cyber attack. Attempts to hack grid into the grids
Yeah,
and the communications network.
yeah. AG said that he has a relative,
No, friend.
a friend. Oh, yeah, friends are not relatives, are they? Who works for Duke Energy, who said that our power generation and our grid are already under cyber attack. Yeah, it happens daily. It happens to water systems all over the country. We don't know how bad the embedding of a malware is in the systems in this country because we've been very open. And one of the good things about the grid is that it's decentralized into regions. So if one goes down, everything doesn't go down. But something like this could take down everything. I'm sorry, I'll come back to you, Pete. You're next.
I think I'm going back to that flipping of the faces, and what struck me on that is we consider them, each one, aggressively bad, aggressively take over us, etc. And I've always felt we don't act like that in the world. And so don't they see that? And why don't they see that? That we are a little bit more like Europe is, in the sense that, yeah, we got the forces and everything, but we're not going after anybody other than retaliation.
Yeah. So the comment was that we certainly don't appear as aggressive as they may think that we are. Why don't they see that and back off? It's primarily because we're just in the way of them achieving their sovereign objectives. We're a speed bump, we're a barrier, we're in their way. We got to get out of their way. Us and people like us. Pete?
You didn't mention the threat of another pandemic, but there are those that think that China already was responsible for COVID.
Pete says, I didn't mention another pandemic, and there are those who think that China was responsible for COVID. I'm one of those. That's certainly a possibility too, but it wouldn't be as fast as this. You could layer that in later if you wanted to overwhelm the health services. Yeah. We didn't talk about biological at all. But that's even the worst threat. I can't even think about. I wouldn't sleep well at night if I had to think about that. Other questions or comments? This is great. That's why we're doing this, by the way. It's for discussion. I'm not a lecturer. I know a lot about snack food marketing. Rick?
Mike, the electric grid is quite vulnerable. So we know that. Are they dealing with that vulnerability right now? Two questions, that's one. To me, that is so vulnerable, and we know that. Are they dealing with improving that, diminishing that vulnerability?
So the question was, we know the electric grid is vulnerable. Are our leaders, civilian and military, working with the utilities to address that? The answer is yes, they are. There is some collaboration. The White House, about 3 months ago, abolished an office in the Department of Defense that was collaborating with utilities like Duke and others. They abolished an office that was sharing best cyber practices and cybersecurity. So I don't know where that stands. I don't know how valuable it was, but it's rather odd that we abolish that function in the federal government at a time like this. Yeah. Second question?
The second question, the U.S. doesn't initiate wars. Do we have intelligence such that we know this is coming? And if so, if we knew that, would we initiate rather than prevent?
Rick says the U.S. has a history of not initiating war. If we had intelligence that this was coming, would we preempt it? I don't know the answer to that. I would think it'd be a tough sell to the U.S. people right now, given the lack of trust in any institution, government in particular.
I think our bombing of Iran's nuclear facilities was a preemptive strike.
Yeah, Pete says the bombing of the Iranian nuclear facility was a preemptive strike. Yeah, I guess it was. How effective it was is up for grabs. Yeah. Other questions or comments? This is great. Okay.
Well, it showed strength on our part, and, when the United States did that.
Yeah.
And I, personally, I was grateful they did it, because I was beginning to wonder whether we were just a bunch of wimps.
I'm glad you said that. Margaret said she was proud that we took action against the nuclear sites because it showed we're not a bunch of wimps. Actually, that's part of the deterrence doctrine, is every once in a while you need to have a demonstration of force just to remind people you will act. You know, it's not, you don't want to be the crazy man. You don't want to be the blindfolded drunk in a bar with a 45. But you do have to exercise. Every once in a while, they say it pays to have a demonstration of force just to remind people you're serious. We're going to talk about how serious we've been about some of these threats in just a minute. Good question. Okay, so here's some more bad news. We have enough precision munitions to last realistically between 8 and 30 days. Here you go. Who was it that asked about preparedness and inventories earlier? Yeah. One of the reasons the Army is really upset with the defense contractors, because we pay $3 million for a missile that China can produce for $300,000. Virtually the same capabilities. So at least the frontline Army military leadership is really upset with the defense establishment. They feel like we're not getting a good value for our dollar because we could buy 10 times as more missiles, right? If they're 10 times as cheap. So part of the issue is we don't have big stockpiles right now. When Iran launched that massive missile attack against Israel and we stepped in to help defend Israel, we went through 25% of our high-altitude interceptor missiles. 25% of the entire U.S. inventory just for a day and a half of battle off the Israeli coast. So one of the guys in our class, one of the colonels, after class, they were all deployed to the four winds across the country. His assignment is to go to Indiana to supervise improvements in efficiency at an artillery shell plant producing 155 millimeter shells, which is the main battlefield artillery piece that the U.S. and most of our allies have. But it's a long pull getting things geared up. We've let things wither on the vine from a military manufacturing capability. We've been distracted by bright, shiny objects, these new gee-whiz weapons, when the other countries have invested in basic things that can still do a lot of damage and maybe even more effectively than ours. So sorry for that sidebar. Yes, A.G.
Where does the new technology, like drone technology, fit into this picture of the relative
Yeah.
conditions? Let's
Yeah, the question, AG's question was, where does drone technology fit into all of this? They have been tearing up pages at the Pentagon, and moving heavily into privately developed drone systems, because they now, all of a sudden, rather than buying an F-35 jet, they want to buy 200,000 drones or 300,000 drones. So there's a big push towards the drone technology simply because of what we observed in Ukraine. Ukraine has been like a big military test market for the U.S. I was told we've been sending top secret weapons over there to be tested in the battlefield. And the U.S. is gaining great intelligence from that, and that's part of the reason for the big push into drones. So, if you run out of munitions, oh, I'm sorry, Sally.
It's all right. I think not only is it alarming that we are 15 to 30 days worth of arms, most of Western Europe has just sat back and not spent any money on this kind of thing because they're sure.
Yeah. So Sally's point was that not only have we not developed enough arms and munitions for inventory, Europe has certainly sat back and not prepared proper defenses. And that's absolutely true. They have not, because they depended on us. Let me get a drink of water. Okay, we're back live again. So what happens when you run out of munitions? What do? Just abandon the battlefield? Nope. We're going to do what any good American would do. We get out our checkbook and get on a plane and go all over the world and say, hey, we're interested in buying pretty much anything you have. Now, what kind of prices do you think you'll pay? And secondly, if for some reason we're not winning, who wants to support a loser if China could come out as top dog in this? Do you want to be the ones that supported the loser? Maybe not. So it's not a good situation. Not a good situation. So while all this is going on, I'm still taking you down. We're going to take you back up in a second. While all this is going on, we're now engaged with China in Taiwan. The planners say we need to raise another 1 million troops. So you've got all this chaos going on at home. We need to draft, train, equip, and get them into theater, and that will take at least a year. At least a year. And in the meantime, China is making advances on the battlefield. So now I'm going to bring it back up. So after many months, maybe years of conflict, what's the outcome? Probably a negotiated peace, and nobody wins, but the U.S. is pretty severely damaged by all of this, and the Chinese never set foot once on our land. So that's the way they see the conflict unfolding. A lot of treasure lost, and years of rebuilding ahead of us, and a really chaotic world situation. Barbara?
Are they speculating a time frame for this scenario? I'm talking 5 years, 20 years? Or somewhere in between?
Yeah, Barbara's question is, are the planners forecasting a time frame for this, timeline for this to happen? They think it's likely within 10 years. It may not unfold this way, depending on the political situation in Taiwan, how well defended it becomes. Taiwan is investing heavily in drones as well, undersea drones, air drones, land drones. So it's a fluid situation, and at least through this discussion today, you'll be more aware of what's going on, and you can make your own informed judgments about how things might unfold. Yes?
Yeah, this is one of the things that concerns me. You look at Ukraine, you look at Israel, and you look at what we're doing to defend, in quotes, them. And I keep thinking about, are we reducing our stockpiles and whatever, and maybe this is the strategy with Putin and China, to weakened by spending now.
Yeah. The comment is that maybe China and Russia are really happy to see us expending munitions by these distractions. And that's exactly part of the planning that went into the Taiwan invasion plan was distractions in Japan and Philippines. They'd love to see us run out of munitions. They have a good handle on what we have in terms of stockpiles, and we only have a ballpark idea of what they have. But we think China also could be out of precision munitions in 8 to 30 days. But it's really a guess right now because it's so opaque over there. Other questions? Yes, Jim.
Is there any thought going on with these people about what we should be doing different from what we're doing now? And how the current administration might react to this?
So is there any discussion about what we should be doing different? And was there any discussion about how the current administration is reacting to all of this? The latter part about the administration, all we heard was that the presentation was made to Hegseth's deputy, who was one down from the Secretary of Defense. The military, I can tell you from talking to the people, the military people I ran into are as apolitical as anybody you'll see. They abide by the Constitution. We have civilian oversight of the military, and there was no discussion about the administration or previous administrations or names, not once. And to those who say, you know, I can't believe what the current administration is doing. I hope the military's going to do something about it. Well, you better think twice before you want the military to do something about an administration they don't like, because it might be one you like. As far as what we should be doing different, they pressed on, number one, building up inventories of strategic weapons. Number two, better civilian preparedness and awareness that something like this could come. Now, we are historically bad at being prepared for disasters. It's really bad. We think there are insurance policies for everything. There aren't any for this. But civilian preparedness and awareness, that's one of the reasons that they invite the civilians like me to go, is to go out and do a talk like this and get the word going among the regular people in this country like us. Good question. Okay, everybody feeling good so far? One more question on this topic.
I agree with you about getting people to go. How come we don't have like the news services doing what you're doing? Or maybe they are, I'm not missing it. I mean,
Yeah, question was,
about getting prepared, they're the ones with the audience.
yeah. So the question was, why aren't the news services doing what I'm doing right now? I don't know. If it doesn't bleed, it doesn't sell, you know? I don't know what the interaction, I don't know how formal an effort the military has made to inform Americans, because they always try to walk a fine line between informing us and scaring us half to death. And you don't want to be accused of crying wolf. So how do you strike that balance? To me, that's the big strategic issue from a communication standpoint. Yeah, everybody, they ought to be teaching this in school, at least, and getting the kids educated. But to my knowledge, it's not going on right now. I think we've forgotten about cursive writing and civics to make room for advanced TikTok video editing. Any other questions or comments? AG?
Is there any discussion about how polarized our nation is and prospects of depolarizing our people?
Boy, that's a great question. The question was there any discussion about polarization in this country and how we go about depolarizing? There wasn't, but there was not in the classrooms and in the lectures because of the focus on national security, even though that is a serious issue, because you can see that once the chaos starts, it's going to be like the Hunger Games in this country with people looking out for themselves rather than each other. So the polarization issue, I've been through a couple classes at Ollie on that. And the only solutions that seem to be, that are recurring are read from across a wide spectrum of sources, get your news from lots of different places, including places you don't like, form your own opinions, question everything, and see if it really makes sense. Because it's easy to get the emotional hook into you, and you go, yeah, I really hate that person. But when you step back and take a look at the situation and let things cool down, you might have a different view. I wish I had a better answer for you. Yes?
As for the need for communication of the danger and what to do about it and so forth, is that a realistic expectation or hope now, given the confusion of our communication, all of the conspiracy theorists that can jump at anything? And how can you tell any amount of truth and get it taken seriously?
Yeah. So the question about communications is how do you get communications out about something like this in the face of conspiracy theories that are popping up every minute? I would just say, anytime I hear something that really hooks me emotionally, it could be a conspiracy theory because it's something I want to believe, even though it's not true. And if somebody can somehow connect the dots so that you see, instead of stars, you see a constellation, then you could get hooked. So all I can say is we need better educated people in this country who are willing to question everything. Barbara?
This is not really an answer, but more like an explanation. As you said earlier, we're not very good at planning, long-range planning for stuff. I don't mean individual people, but as a culture, as a country, as a nationally. Climate change would be exhibit one. Educated people know it's not good, and we're not doing anything about it as a country. So we tend to react as individuals, as people, we tend to react to short-term stuff and not long-term. Another thing, that whenever, because we have such instant news now, when you get, news alerts about something, say a shooting or a power grid going down or whatever, or fire or something, and there's always news that comes out first, and in time, it doesn't have to be in much time, it could be hours or a day or two. Oh, well, it wasn't quite right. It's actually not the way it seemed at first. We didn't have as many deaths. Like in the floods, there was one period in the Texas floods, there's 160 people missing.
Yeah.
The next day was only 3.
Yep.
So you have to, at least I try to temper my reaction to something. If it's breaking news, it's right away, and wait and see a little while if that's really breaking news or if there's some more nuanced information about it.
Barbara's offering good counseling advice. Breaking news may not end up being the breaking news that it seems like. You got to give it time to get some more facts and get the situation squared away. The other point you made is that we're really 9-month-old babies in this country. We know when our diapers are wet and when we're hungry, and that's long-term planning, next meal, right? Other questions or comments? Putney.
You haven't mentioned anything about North Korea. I mean, they kind of lurk at this or in the general neighborhood of Japan, China, Russia, and they somewhat of a factor. And also, I have a hard time believing if we did have some kind of major conflict, that there would be some animosity reserved in Japan as a result of what went on during World War II. Are those factors at all that anybody are taking into account?
Yeah, Putney said I left out North Korea as a bad guy, and that's true. Let me see how much time we have. Let me zip ahead, because I'm going to get to that point. There was a discussion by General Brooks about the concept of limited war, and at the end of his lecture, somebody got up and raised his hand and said, "What is the likelihood that some country will use a nuclear weapon in the next 10 years?" And he paused for quite a bit, and he said, "I'm retired, so I can tell you my opinion." If he was active duty, he wouldn't tell you that. He said he thought there was a 60% likelihood that some country would use probably a tactical nuclear weapon in the next 10 years. And the likely characters were North Korea, because they're always clamoring for attention. The Forbidden Kingdom over there. One of the most opaque societies in the world. So North Korea, they're trying to get respect on the world stage. Iran, with a suitcase nuke of some type that could spread radioactive material throughout New York City or Washington or someplace. Those would be the first, those were really the two primary ones that would be most likely to use it. So, but from a threat to the U.S., North Korea is more of a threat to Japan because they're just across the Sea of Japan. They're always lobbing missiles over Japan into the east, into the Pacific, more as an annoyance than anything else. Carrie, how are we doing on time? We still okay? Is everybody okay? All right. You want to keep going? Good. Yeah, haven't had enough war. Let's talk about limited war. All right. So I'm going to move quickly through this because this will prompt some questions too. So this is the thought that after World War II, the thought of this happening was unthinkable. Mutually assured destruction. We've got as many nukes as Russia has. So by having those inventories, it's not likely anything will happen. So what happened was that by avoiding nuclear war, we tacitly endorsed limited war. These little relief valves of conflict in countries that would blow off steam and then calm back down. And the goal was obviously to avoid a world war. But what happened is this. This chart, which you can't read, starts in 1946 and goes through 2023. And it maps out the number of conflicts by region. Red is the Americas, dark blue is Europe, gray is the Middle East, teal is Asia, gold is Africa. But you can see that the number of conflicts has been on the rise worldwide ever since World War II. This is just the kind of stuff we were trying to avoid. So ironically, by embracing this limited war concept, the world's actually a far more dangerous place than it was in 1946 or 1952 when we had nukes staring at each other from Moscow to Washington. And if you're looking for examples of how the U.S. got involved in some of these, how about Korea? That wasn't a war. What was it? A police action, yeah. Let's send in the cops. Vietnam, no declaration of war there. Look what's going on in Ukraine. Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan. Wait, there's more. Rwanda, Kosovo. The latest conflict between Israel and Iran, that's not a war. ISIS in Africa, all these terrorist activities. What's going on in Gaza? That's not a war. India versus Pakistan, two nuclear-powered countries swapping weapons across the border in the Kashmir. So it's really ironic what's happened. This is your question, Putney, about North Korea. Russia was actually number 1 on the list in terms of using a tactical nuclear weapon because it's part of their military doctrine. It's written into their battle plans that if push comes to shove, we're going to use tactical nukes on the battlefield. Second was North Korea. All I want is respect. And third was Iran. Not that Iran would directly use the weapons, but they'd give them to some of their terrorist buddies, the proxies. Which takes us to Iran. I'm going to zip through these because we're at the very end. Again, Mike's favorite map. The purple color is Iran's geography compared to the U.S., about 1/3 the size of the U.S. 92 million people versus 345 million. 92 million people in Iran. Unfortunately, their doctrine is dedicated to destroying the U.S. and Israel. Israel first, U.S. second. And maybe not the U.S., but U.S. interests. They don't like us being in their neighborhood because they can't use their terrorist shenanigans to disrupt democratic or emerging governments. Iran has a standing army, reserves, and active duty of 1 million troops. How many troops are active duty and reserve in the U.S.? How many troops? To the nearest 100. Well, I'm asking you the answer, Margaret. Well, we can't get people to volunteer. How many active duty and reserve troops do we have in the U.S.? Pete's correct. Pete wins the big prize at 2 million. So here's Iran with only 92 million people. They got half as many active duty and reserve military that we do. And then they got all these proxies with Hamas, Hezbollah, Shia militants, and Houthis all over the Middle East. So how has negotiation worked out with Iran? Well, here's our lineup. You go back to Carter, on through Reagan, Bush, Clinton, W, Obama, Trump, Biden, and Trump again. How's that worked out for you? Well, here's a chart of Iranian uranium stockpiles starting in 2010 in May, and they started building up stockpiles, and then the comprehensive nuclear deal went into effect, and things went down to zero. There were UN inspectors there with the International Atomic Energy Agency there. And then in the middle of 2018, we exited the JCPOA, the agreement. Then Biden took office, and stocks stayed pretty low. And then Biden took office and tried to rekindle discussions about rejoining the treaty. And to this point, Iran, obviously, they don't trust us, is what they say, because we went back on our word back here when Trump exited the agreement. Kind of hard to argue with that. So then they started building up stockpiles. And the earlier bars are all gold, and these top ones are gold, but these bottom ones represent 60% enrichment, which is like days away from turning uranium into weapons. Let's look at it another way. This was a chart that was released in May of this year, 1 month before Israel attacked Iran. And this is from the International Atomic Energy Agency. This is the UN agency that had people on the ground in Iran up to a certain point. They were 2 to 3 days away in May from producing one weapon. They were only a month away from producing 11. They were only 2 months away from producing 15. And you can see the growth in weapons. And I got a feeling that Netanyahu and others got a glimpse of this chart and decided they were going to do something preemptively, and they did. So what did they do? Well, they attacked these sites in Iran. The dark blue ones are radar defense facilities. The burgundy ones are missile facilities. And then the nuclear facilities are in gold. And the nuclear scientists are in green. To do this, Israel had to get their aircraft to fly 1,200 miles from Tel Aviv to Tehran. And they were able to pull that off, refueling the planes, knocking out all the air defenses, and doing quite a bit of damage. And then the question about what's underground at Fordo came up. We had the discussions about using the B-2s because we're the only ones with the 30,000-pound bunker buster bomb. So the B-2s flew 36-hour mission nonstop. They took off from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, or Missouri, depending on where you grew up in Missouri. They flew 7,000 miles, delivered their payloads, refueled multiple times, and flew back without ever touching the ground. An unbelievable feat. 6,900 miles between refueling, but because of the bomb loads, you didn't get quite that mileage out of a tank of gas on a B-2. What did they do? You've seen these charts before in the news. Those little pinholes up there are where the bunker busters went 300 to 500 feet deep below ground before detonating at the Fordo underground facility. And where does that leave Iran? Well, we know the program is weakened. We don't know how much. There was a lot of hubbub, a lot of chest thumping after the mission. I think the intelligence, to Barbara's point, you got to let it play out because it takes months to do an intelligence assessment on something that's underground where no Westerners have access. So it's going to take a while. New sanctions were imposed right after the mission. Iran now has few air defenses. It's pretty disruptive in society. They're suffering rolling blackouts, which is nothing new. And they did agree to join in some Oslo nuclear talks, but nothing has been nailed as far as I know. We don't really know the degree of damage. They are not stopping. They are reaching out to BRICS nations. Everybody know the BRICS nations? Who are they?
Brazil, Russia, India, China, no, not China.
Brazil, Russia, India, China, and who's the S? South Africa. Yeah, South Africa. Most people forget that. So they're reaching out to the BRICS nations for armaments, defense capabilities, even though they're trying to buy used Russian equipment from these countries in most cases. They banned the UN inspectors. There was a threat to mine the Persian Gulf, but they don't really have the capability to do that right now. And again, they have no air defenses. So that's the Iran situation. And General Kurilla actually did predict what was going to happen with Israel and Iran the week we were up there at the military college. So I've given you a lot to be depressed about. One thing I do want to repeat is that I was incredibly impressed with the caliber, moral fiber, and commitment of our military leaders. They are not a hammer in search of a nail. They would much prefer to never fire a shot on our behalf, but they are willing to defend this country if we're attacked. So I came away feeling inspired by meeting these people and rubbing elbows with them, and it was a real privilege. Okay, a few more questions? Yes.
Where are the next 10 or 20 places you're gonna give this talk?
Where are the next 10 or 20 places I'm going to give this talk? I'm probably going to do it at Ollie.
But down where the ordinary person
Yeah,
can hear this.
yeah. There are some ordinary people at NC State. Yeah, yeah. I'll give the talk where anybody wants to hear it, but I'm not a spokesman for the military. I'm just a guy who went through the program. AG?
Not sure how to approach this other than all of the news, all of the talk is about getting to a nuclear weapon through uranium enrichment. That is not the only way to build a nuclear weapon. You can produce plutonium in nuclear reactors. And I haven't heard any discussion much about the existence of nuclear reactors anyway, I point out. I do have an impression that they do have some heavy water reactors,
Yeah.
but I haven't heard anybody speak to the risk with Iran producing nuclear weapons through that.
Yeah. So AG's point was a really good one, that all we talked about was enriching uranium to produce nuclear weapons. And we didn't talk about plutonium as a byproduct from nuclear reaction, and we didn't talk about heavy water plants. The heavy water, my understanding was that the heavy water was down in Natanz. That was their primary sites, but we don't know for sure, but things are scattered throughout the country. Yeah, they do have options. They could go out on the open market. They could write a big check to Pakistan. Pakistan might be willing to help them out and sell them a nuke. So it's a dangerous world out there in terms of nuclear weapons. You're right, there are lots of ways to approach this if you're Iran. They may have more options than we do. Who had another? Yes.
We've talked a lot about weapons, but let's just spare a thought for diplomacy.
Diplomacy, soft power.
Soft power,
Yes.
yes. Keeping in mind that it took over 2 years of brutal negotiations to get that agreement with Iran that caused them to cause their nuclear program. And for several years, it was working. It was very carefully monitored. There were cameras everywhere. There were monitors everywhere. And that the incentives to them in terms of economic development were such that they agreed to it after 2.5 years of negotiation. And then foolishly, for reasons that completely depassed me, we withdrew from the agreement. And basically, although part of the international community remained a signatory of the agreement, it basically gave the Iranians the opportunity to start up their nuclear mischief again.
Yeah.
And we really shot ourselves in the foot on that one.
Is there a question in there?
No, it's your opinion, but it a shout out for diplomacy anyway.
Yeah, so the comment was a shout out for diplomacy. It took 2 years of brutal negotiations to get the JCPOA in place, and then all of a sudden we have a change in administration and poof, it goes away. And now we can't understand why Iran won't let us back in to inspect their nuclear sites. Imagine that. One of the things we talk about in the Great Decisions course at Ollie a lot is the what may be a strategic weakness with the U.S. is that we change administrations every 4 or 8 years, and our adversaries are there for 20 or 25 years. They take a long view. We're like Barbara's 1-year-old, sucking our thumb, waiting to get our diaper changed and get our next feeding. And in the meantime, They're taking a long, steady view of things. And that's what makes them such a formidable adversary. In the past, that wasn't such a big deal because they didn't have the capabilities. But now China's starting to catch up with us, that pacing threat concept. So the world has changed, yes. Barbara.
Right after our attacks on the nuclear facilities in Iran, there was some speculation in the media that maybe their population of Iran, that there might have been significant enough discomfort and upset with what was going on, that there could be potentially some kind of uprising and get rid of the leadership. Nothing came of that at the time, and there doesn't seem to be any comment on that. Was that at all addressed in the War College discussions?
So Barbara's question was about immediately after the attack, there was civil unrest in Iran. There's always been a faction who's been chafing to get more democratic measures in place and to get the religious leaders out of the way and get the military out of the way. The Iranian people, if you were to open it up to a vote, they would probably get rid of their government, much like the Palestinians would, right, if given the chance. So was there discussion about the taking advantage of the unrest while it was going on? Yeah, the only thing I can recall is that immediately after the attacks, the Iranians, the Republican Guard clamped down on dissenters and really started putting people in jail and ramped up their oppression against the rabble-rousers in Iran. Yeah, so you got to, again, it's a long game. I think most people would like to support the Iranian people if they had a chance to have a vote. Blake?
When I came in here, I was thinking that we were upset with the current administration and what they were doing. That's not what we should look back. We should look back what you're talking about and what they are doing, and to get the United States prepared for what is going on from the War College. How does any administration, and bar none of them this current one, have any kind of effect on what's being done? Or do they have any effect?
So Blake said that when he came into the room, we were hearing comments about the current administration, not talking about this kind of stuff that we ought to be talking about. Yeah, this should be topic number one. So to what degree can the administration impact planning to address this?
Do they have any effect?
Well, I can only tell you what I heard from the military officers, and the most senior people I talked to said that their job is to recommend plans, to have alternate choices for the administration to choose from. So they map out, this isn't the only scenario. There are other scenarios out there, but their job is to map out different scenarios for civilian leadership to choose from, and then the military has to go execute against that plan. So there's a lot riding on the administration, whoever it is, making the right call on which approach to take.
They do have some influence.
Yes, quite a bit of influence because we have civilian oversight of the military. Pete?
My comment is I think it's wonderful that you had a chance to go to the War College, and you said it was a 10-month program. How many days were you actually involved?
Pete said I was really lucky to go, and I was. It's a 10-month program. I was there for a week. They have 10 months of intense study on strategy, leadership, diplomacy, because these people will be interacting with country leaders worldwide when they're deployed. They talk significantly about planning for humanitarian assistance. And the last week is called the National Security Seminar. And that one slice out of 10 months is the week that I was there. And that's when they open it up. They bring in speakers from the outside, like the two generals and Mary Surratt, the author about Putin. And then they let us mix it up so we can go back out and spread the word. So yeah, it was a really wonderful experience, and I'm forever grateful that I was
My wife was not able to attend. Was she in fact invited?
She was invited to all the social activities. And yeah, probably. I had to go through an FBI screening before I could get in. Not that she wouldn't pass an FBI screening, Pete. Don't tell anybody that. I hope she's not watching this video. Other questions, comments? Yes, Jim.
Question, Mike, thank you so much for doing this.
The applause is for Jim saying thank you to me. Fred has a question.
I have something to add to that. Did the school provide you with the slides?
No, I built all these slides myself from scratch.
Well, this was well delivered and well presented.
Thank you. I learned, Fred, I learned a long time ago doing lots of presentations, words just stink up the place. Images are so much better. Barbara?
So I missed the first presentation, so I was.
Here you go.
I missed the first presentation he made, so I was going to be here come hell or high water. But my husband, although he intended to come here, he could not because he's injured his foot. And I asked Carrie, and I did find out it's recorded, and it's going to be played again through the portal at some future, I'm not sure, whenever Daniel gets back from vacation and can do his magic. So if you know anybody or you want to see it again, pass the word that it will be available on the portal sometime in the near future.
That was your commercial break. Yes, question.
For Barbara, will this be available outside Springmore?
I don't know. Not that I know.
I'm really concerned about.
Carrie, have we ever turned these into YouTube videos?
It is a YouTube video in order to be on the portal.
Oh. Do we have a YouTube account? I do too.
Well, Springmore. Just look up Springmore on YouTube.
Okay. So it will be on YouTube.
Well, that means anybody who has on social media, once we know that it's in the Springmore YouTube, you can post it and share it on social media.
And I had a conversation this morning with the woman who handles some of our social media for Springmore. She works with Beth. So I've got a meeting with her, and I can ask her to post the link, and we'll see what kind of play it gets. Because that's exactly one-to-many is what we need to get the word out. Yeah, and again, I'm the food and beverage marketing guy. I am not the subject matter expert on this. Other questions or comments? All right, you've been a great audience. You're dismissed.